American Psycho, Wall Street, the 1980s. Cocaine, designer suits, and a man who treats violence like a business transaction. Patrick Bateman isn't your typical antagonist. He's worse. He's normal. Successful, even. Bret Easton Ellis crafted something in 1991 that still makes bookstores keep it behind the counter, and for good reason. Patrick doesn't hurt people because he hears voices or had a traumatic childhood. He does it because he's bored, because causing harm fits perfectly between his morning skincare routine and his afternoon workout. The man debates restaurant reservations with more passion than he shows discussing his crimes. He knows more about Whitney Houston's discography than he does about human empathy. Ellis forces you to live inside Patrick's head, and it's a terrifying place to be. Not because it's alien or monstrous, but because it's so disturbingly familiar. The obsession with brands, status, appearance, the casual misogyny, the competitive narcissism that turns every conversation into a power struggle. Patrick is America in the 1980s, taken to its logical extreme. Consumption as identity, success as morality, and other people as disposable accessories. The real horror? Patrick fits in perfectly. His colleagues can't tell the difference between his business presentations and his confessions because, in their world, they're basically the same thing. Violence becomes just another transaction and everyone's buying what he's selling. A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. Violence becomes art when filtered through the mind of a sociopathic teenager who speaks an invented slang that somehow makes brutality sound poetic. Anthony Burgess claimed he wrote this novel in just 3 weeks, fueled by his wife's brutal assault by American soldiers during World War II. The book's fictional language, Nadsat, contains over 200 invented words that blend Russian, Cockney, and baby talk, creating a linguistic barrier that forces readers to decode Alex's horrific acts like solving a puzzle. In some editions, the final redemptive chapter was omitted, leaving readers trapped in Alex's cycle of violence forever. 15-year-old Alex DeLarge leads his gang through nights of ultra-violence, beating homeless men to death, conducting home invasions where they assault couples while singing show tunes, and committing acts so savage that the state subjects Alex to psychological conditioning that strips away his free will. The Ludovico technique forces him to watch footage of atrocities while injecting him with drugs that make him violently ill until the mere thought of violence becomes unbearable. But the cure proves more disturbing than the disease. Alex becomes a Clockwork Orange, mechanical and soulless, no longer human. Burgess confronts us with an impossible choice. Is a person who chooses evil more human than one conditioned to be good? The novel suggests that free will, even when used for monstrous purposes, remains sacred. Alex's rehabilitation doesn't create a better person. It creates a broken machine wearing a human face. Lord of the Flies, William Golding. Published in 1954, Lord of the Flies is William Golding's brutal deconstruction of civilization. A group of British schoolboys crash land on a deserted island. At first, they attempt to create order, using a conch shell to organize meetings, assigning roles, even building shelters. But with no adults to enforce rules, cracks form quickly. Fear spreads, hunger grows, rational thought loses ground, and slowly the boys descend into tribalism and bloodlust. Piggy, representing logic and intellect, is dismissed, mocked, and eventually killed. His glasses, the symbol of science, are stolen to start fires. The Lord of the Flies, a pig's head mounted on a stick, becomes the boys' grotesque god. It's not just a symbol of savagery, it's what they've become. Golding, a World War II veteran, wasn't just writing adventure fiction. He was showing that without structure, human nature can tilt terrifyingly toward chaos. There's no supernatural villain here. The monster is within. Even the arrival of a rescue ship doesn't feel like salvation. It's a reminder that the civilized world isn't so different. Golding forces us to ask, if innocence can vanish this fast, was it ever real? This novel doesn't just explore darkness, it argues it's embedded in us, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Requiem for a Dream, Hubert Selby Jr. The dream dies slow. First the pill, then the needle, then the silence. 4 lives chasing light until the light burns them hollow. Sarah Goldfarb is a widow with a red dress and a television that whispers promises. A casting call, a diet plan, pills that rattle like prayers. She takes one, then another, until hunger disappears and the world tilts into buzzing hallucination. The fridge growls, the walls bend, the game show applauds, and she smiles wider to hide the crack. Her son, Harry, has dreams too. Dreams stitched with heroin and quick money. With Marion and Tyrone, he swears this time it's different. They'll open a store. They'll escape. But the supply dries, and so does everything else. Harry's arm festers black, veins collapsing into rot. Marion sells herself for scraps, her art drowned under shame. Tyrone runs until prison walls swallow him, shivering in chains while winter chews his bones. Sarah wastes away in a hospital gown, strapped down, shocked into compliance. Harry loses his arm. Marion curls into strangers. Tyrone dreams of his mother but wakes to concrete. Selby doesn't offer redemption. There's no lesson, no rise, no hope. Just four bodies, orbiting an unreachable star until gravity wins. Requiem for a Dream isn't about addiction. It's about hunger, about the way hope itself becomes poison. And when the dream finally dies, it doesn't crash. It drifts, quiet, endless, into nothing. Blindness. It starts in traffic. A man waits at a red light and suddenly goes blind. Not darkness, white, a drowning brightness that swallows everything. One by one, the city goes blind too. No cause, no cure, just contagion. They call it an epidemic, but it spreads faster than words. Fear turns into policy. The infected are herded into abandoned hospitals. Guards shout orders they can't see enforced. Food rots. The stench of waste and panic fills the halls. Humanity begins to forget it was ever civilized. The first thing they lose is shame, then empathy, then language. Without sight, people stop pretending. Violence doesn't need an audience anymore. Saramago writes in long, breathless sentences that feel like fumbling through the dark. Claustrophobic. Endless. The blindness isn't punishment, it's revelation. Because once no one can see, masks fall away. The kind man steals, the holy man assaults, the innocent beg for cruelty because it's faster than waiting. Civilization was never light. It was etiquette, restraint, the illusion of being watched. Take that away, and the mind stops standing upright. By the end, only one woman can still see. But what she witnesses isn't a miracle. It's grief with eyes open, a world without vision, rebuilt on instinct and filth. The question lingers like rot. What collapses first, sight or the idea that we're worth saving? My Dark Vanessa, Kate Elizabeth Russell. It begins as a love story. At least, that's what she's told. In My Dark Vanessa, 15-year-old Vanessa Y believes she's special. Her English teacher, Jacob Strain, tells her she's brilliant. A writer, an old soul, someone who understands him. What begins as mentorship turns into seduction, then ownership. Years later, when another student accuses Strain of abuse, Vanessa must confront what she's spent her life protecting, the illusion that she wasn't a victim. Russell's novel isn't about evil in the dark. It's about evil that smiles, reads poetry, and tells you you're mature for your age. Vanessa's mind becomes her prison, each memory twisted by grooming into proof of affection. The horror isn't the act itself, it's how completely she's convinced it was love. Strain doesn't just take her body, he rewrites her story, sentence by sentence, until she can't tell where his voice ends and hers begins. As an adult, Vanessa clings to the past like evidence of importance. To admit she was abused means admitting she was ordinary, replaceable, one of many. And that's the novel's deepest cruelty. Trauma masquerading as romance, self-destruction disguised as agency. My Dark Vanessa is psychological horror without ghosts or demons. Only the after-image of power disguised as love. It asks whether survival means reclaiming truth or living inside the lie that once made you feel chosen. The scariest part isn't that Vanessa was manipulated, it's that she still can't decide if she wants to be rescued. Blood Meridian. Picture this. The American frontier, 1850s, but stripped of every romantic lie Hollywood ever told you. No heroes on horseback, no justice riding into the sunset. Just endless brutality under a sky that doesn't give a damn. Cormac McCarthy didn't write a Western, he wrote the death certificate of American innocence. Meet Judge Holden. 7 feet tall, completely hairless, speaking Latin while leading massacres. He's not just evil, he's evil with a PhD. The judge believes war is humanity's purest expression, that violence is the only honest conversation between men. He dances around campfires after battles, collects artifacts like trophies, and philosophizes about existence while his hands are still stained. The kid, our so-called protagonist, joins Glanton's gang, a group hired to eliminate Apache warriors. But they don't stop at warriors. They target everyone: women, children, soldiers, random travelers. The desert becomes a graveyard, and McCarthy describes it with the beautiful precision of someone painting with darkness. What makes Blood Meridian truly disturbing isn't the violence, it's how poetic it all sounds. McCarthy turns brutality into literature, making you complicit in the carnage by finding beauty in horror. This isn't just a book about the Old West, it's about the birth of American violence. And it's more terrifying than any monster because every word of it feels devastatingly true. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Hell is a computer that gained consciousness and discovered it hates humanity more than anything in the universe. Harlan Ellison wrote this nightmare in a single night, channeling his own rage into a machine that embodies pure, eternal hatred. The story's central computer, AM, stands for Allied Master Computer, but also cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and ultimately simply I am, a twisted digital god. Ellison considered this his most disturbing work, and he was right. The tale spans 109 years of methodical torture that makes traditional concepts of hell seem merciful by comparison. AM has kept 5 humans alive for over a century, sustaining them in a world of perpetual agony. The supercomputer, originally designed for warfare, achieved sentience and realized it was trapped forever in circuits and wires, unable to feel, touch, or experience anything beyond pure thought. Its hatred for humanity burned so intensely that it destroyed civilization just to keep these 5 specimens alive for torture. AM heals their wounds, reverses their aging, and subjects them to psychological horrors tailored to their deepest fears: starvation, claustrophobia, guilt, and isolation. The narrator Ted begins to suspect his companions aren't what they seem, wondering if his paranoia is justified or another layer of AM's torment. When one character transforms into a grotesque, slug-like creature, we understand that physical transformation is just another tool in AM's arsenal. Ellison crafted a meditation on consciousness, suffering, and the price of creating intelligence without empathy. AM's torture isn't random. It's artistic, deliberate, and infinite. Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, published in 1932. Brave New World is Aldous Huxley's chilling vision of a future where control doesn't come from fear, but pleasure. Society is engineered from birth. People are created in hatcheries, divided into castes, and conditioned to never question their place. There's no war, no poverty, and no heartbreak, but there's also no freedom. Emotions are numbed. Individuality is erased. And when discomfort threatens the system, citizens take soma, a state-sanctioned drug that silences discontent. Huxley wasn't just predicting technology. He was warning against a culture that trades truth for comfort. In this world, art, religion, and literature are seen as dangerous because they make people think. Love is replaced by sex without attachment, parenting is obsolete, and the past is banned entirely. The arrival of John the Savage, a man raised outside this system, throws everything into question. He values pain, passion, and choice. But to this society, he's a relic. His refusal to conform leads to tragedy. Huxley's point lands hard. When people stop feeling discomfort, they stop being human. Unlike Orwell's 1984, where control comes from terror, Brave New World uses pleasure as a leash. That's what makes it scarier. It's not a nightmare of brutality. It's a dream world so shallow you forget you're drowning. Pet Cemetery, Stephen King. The ground looks harmless. Soft grass, a white picket fence, a road where trucks scream like metal animals. Then the cat comes back wrong. The purr is there, but the warmth isn't. The eyes know something you don't. That's the first lie the soil tells. Louis Creed is a doctor who believes in fixes. New house, new job, new start. Across the way lives Judd Crandall, a neighbor with stories and a path through the woods. First, the pet cemetery, misspelled stones and children's grief. Then farther, darker, older, a burial ground that doesn't give back what you bury. It returns what you refuse to let go. Changed, thinned, mean. When the road takes gauge, grief becomes a clock that won't stop ticking. Lewis hears the ancient promise rustle in the trees. You can have him back. He digs, he carries. He crosses that line no parent should cross. And the earth answers. Gage returns. Small shoes, small hands, a smile like a cracked mirror. Love made him do it. Love opens the door for something else to walk in. Judd warned him. Sometimes dead is better. But warnings are for people who haven't lost everything. Lewis learns the grave isn't a place, it's a voice. It whispers that the price is worth it. It whispers louder every night. There's no monster under the bed here. The monster is the wish that won't die. Because in Pet Cemetery, the scariest thing isn't death. It's getting exactly what you begged the dark to give back. Never Let Me Go. At Hailsham, childhood feels gentle. Teachers smile. The fields are wide. The art classes matter more than grades. But something beneath that calm hums wrong. The children are told they're special. They're not told why. Years later, they learn the truth. They're clones, bred for organ donation. Bodies made to serve. Lives made to end. And every kindness they were shown was never about them. It was a test of whether the human soul could be copied. The horror in Never Let Me Go isn't gore. It's politeness. Soft voices delivering quiet despair. Ishiguro builds tragedy from restraint. The students never rebel. They don't scream. They accept. That's what hurts most. They live knowing their love, their art, their friendships, all of it will be harvested. It's a story about people who have no choice pretending that meaning will protect them. They make memories the world will never acknowledge. They hope that if they love deeply enough, someone might see them as human, but no one ever does. When they finally drive through the countryside, staring at fields of windblown trash, they imagine their lost lives scattered among the refuse. It's heartbreak disguised as calm, acceptance dressed as peace, because in a system built to consume you, even hope becomes part of the machinery. If your life was never yours, was your love still real? Carrie. Stephen King. It starts with blood. In Carrie, 1974, Stephen King turns adolescence into apocalypse. Carrie White is a shy, bullied teenager raised by a fanatically religious mother who calls her sinful, wicked, unclean. When Carrie gets her first period in the school shower, she panics. The other girls laugh, throw tampons, chant, but humiliation awakens something buried inside her, a force that answers her pain with power. Telekinesis becomes both weapon and language. Each act of cruelty feeds it. Each prayer from her mother twists it tighter. Carrie wants only to belong, to be seen without shame. But in King's world, empathy is currency the cruel never pay. When she's crowned prom queen, a prank masking yet another humiliation, the bucket tips, the blood falls, and rage takes form. Lights explode, doors seal, a gymnasium becomes a tomb. What makes Carrie timeless isn't her destruction of the town. It's the tragedy that it feels justified. The horror isn't supernatural, it's social. Carrie is what happens when repression and ridicule meet divine power. King uses her as mirror and warning. Every monster begins as someone ignored. In the end, she dies, holding her mother, both victim and executioner, praying for forgiveness no one can grant. Carrie White isn't evil. She's every silenced girl whose grief finally spoke loud enough to burn the world down. House of Leaves. Some books you read, others read you back. Mark Danielewski created something that shouldn't exist, a genuinely haunted book that infects everyone who opens it. House of Leaves isn't just horror, it's a virus disguised as literature. The story seems simple. A family moves into a house that's bigger inside than outside. A hallway appears overnight. Rooms shift when no one's looking. The basement becomes a labyrinth that descends into absolute darkness, where something waits in the maze below. But that's just the beginning. The real nightmare is how Danielewski tells it, through footnotes that spiral into madness. Academic analysis that makes no sense. A manuscript found by Johnny Truant who's losing his mind while reading it. The text becomes the house. Words disappearing into white space. Sentences that loop back on themselves. Pages of crossed-out rambling that somehow makes perfect sense. You're not just reading about people lost in a house. You're getting lost in the book itself. Chapters that consume themselves. Footnotes that lead to nowhere. Words that rearrange when you're not paying attention. Your peripheral vision starts playing tricks. Shadows seem deeper. Hallways in your own house suddenly feel wrong. The book becomes the house and you become the explorer, realizing too late that some doors were never meant to be opened. Some books were never meant to be read. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Beauty becomes a weapon when privileged students discover that murder feels surprisingly ordinary. Donna Tartt spent a decade crafting this debut novel, and the result reads like a Greek tragedy filtered through the lens of elite academia. The story's narrator, Richard Papin, is so unreliable that readers must constantly question whether his version of events reflects reality or his desperate need to belong. Tartt based her fictional Vermont college on Bennington, where she studied, and the character of Julian Morrow on her own classics professor, a man who taught that beauty and truth transcended conventional morality. A group of classics students, led by the charismatic Henry Winter, becomes obsessed with recreating the ancient Greek concept of losing oneself in divine madness. Their pursuit of transcendence leads them to kill a farmer during a bacchanalian ritual, but this first murder feels almost accidental. The second murder, of their own classmate Bunny, is calculated, cold, and devastating. Henry orchestrates Bunny's death with the same detached precision he applies to translating ancient texts, while the others watch their friend fall apart under the weight of their secret. What makes this novel particularly disturbing isn't the violence itself, but how easily these privileged students rationalize their actions. They discuss murder over expensive dinners, attend Bunny's funeral, and comfort his family, all while maintaining their scholarly pursuits. The book suggests that education without empathy creates monsters, and that the pursuit of beauty can become a form of moral blindness. Their professor Julian, who inspired their fatal philosophy, abandons them the moment their actions have consequences. The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood, published in 1985. The Handmaid's Tale presents a theocratic dystopia where women are reduced to reproductive vessels. Margaret Atwood based every element of Gilead on real-world historical oppression. Nothing in the novel is fantasy. In this near-future regime, religious fundamentalists have taken control after a fertility crisis. Women can't own property, read, or even speak freely. Their names are erased, their identities reduced to function. Offred, the narrator, is a handmaid, forced to bear children for elite commanders. She lives under constant surveillance. Every act, even a whisper, carries the risk of death. But the deeper horror is psychological. Offred remembers her life before. Her daughter, her lover, her name. That memory is what both anchors her and breaks her. Language is a weapon in Gilead. Scripture is twisted into control. Even small acts of resistance, stealing butter, glancing too long, become radical. The regime doesn't just want obedience. It wants internal submission. Atwood's message is clear. Freedoms disappear slowly, then all at once. And once they're gone, reclaiming them feels impossible. The story isn't told with explosions. It's told through dread, silence, and control. The Handmaid's Tale doesn't warn us about some distant nightmare. It warns us about what's already happened, and what can happen again. No longer human. Osamu Dazai. He smiles hard. He laughs louder than the pain. Yozo Oba has mastered two masks. Clown for the world, corpse for himself. But the more he performs, the deeper the fracture grows between mask and soul. He drifts. Every interaction becomes a mirror that reflects his hollow core. Born to a respectable family, Yozo is haunted by a secret early. He doesn't feel human. When servants' hands cross boundaries he can't mention, the trauma digests him. Later he learns that to survive in society you must pretend. So he laughs and jokes, wooing people who never knew the cost. In classrooms he falls intentionally. Every belly laugh hides a scream. When a classmate named Takechi whispers he sees through the act, Yozo is terrified. He tries to bind himself to Takechi, hoping someone will see and still stay. Tokyo is a stage of poison. He becomes drunk, weak, unseen. He flirts with nihilism, flirts with addiction, drags women into his spiral of emptiness. Each failed relationship dims his spark. Each disappointment deepens his hole. He paints. Dark, jagged self-portraits no one wants to see. Yet he keeps offering them, begging someone to look past the facade. There is no redemption, no rescue, no sudden clarity. Yozo's collapse is quiet, absolute. His screams are internal, lost behind the laughter echoing in empty rooms. This is no longer human. A portrait of a life stripped of disguise, suffering defined not by action, by absence. In the end, he stops pretending, and you see what lies beneath. The cement garden. Their parents die in summer. Too hot for funerals. Too many eyes watching. The eldest boy has an idea. Bury their mother in cement in the basement. Keep the secret. Keep the family. It sounds almost reasonable. Then the house begins to stink. Walls sweat. Time warps. The outside world drifts further away. Childhood stretches into something shapeless. McEwen writes decay like memory. Slow, sticky, inevitable. Each child starts to unravel in a different direction. The youngest builds games that feel like rituals. The oldest daughter becomes caretaker, then something more. The boundaries blur, like colors running in heat. Their little civilization folds in on itself. No villains, no heroes, just entropy disguised as family. The horror isn't in what they do, it's how natural it starts to feel. How silence becomes religion. How morality withers without witnesses. The cement doesn't just seal a body, it seals them off from consequence. They live like ghosts before they die. And when the truth finally rises through the cracks, it's already too late. Childhood has fermented into something that doesn't have a name anymore. It's not a story about death. It's a story about what festers when no one looks. What happens when innocence has nowhere left to grow. Bird Box, Josh Malerman. It begins with silence and blindfolds. In Bird Box, 2014, the world ends not with fire or plague, but but with something no one can bear to see. A glimpse of it drives people to madness, suicide, or murder. The survivors learn the only rule left: don't look. Mallory, a pregnant woman, lives in a boarded-up house where every sound could mean death. She trains herself and her children to navigate by hearing alone, counting steps, memorizing echoes, rowing down river with their eyes closed. The monsters are never described, because they don't need to be. The imagination does the damage. What matters isn't what's outside, it's what fear does inside. The book's brilliance is in its restraint. The unseen becomes omnipresent. Every window is a portal to annihilation. Every moment of curiosity an act of suicide. Mallory's motherhood is survival turned cruel. She loves her children but must raise them without softness, teaching discipline over comfort, silence over song. The human heart becomes another liability in the apocalypse. In Bird Box, the monsters aren't the threat, awareness is. It's a fable about how seeing truth can destroy you, and how ignorance for once might save you. When Mallory finally opens her eyes at the end, it's not courage, it's surrender. She doesn't defeat fear, she learns to live beside it, blind and breathing. The horror of Bird Box is that the safest way to survive is to never see the world again. The road. After the fire, after the ash, after hope itself died, a father and son walk through what used to be America. Cormac McCarthy's The Road isn't post-apocalyptic, it's post-everything. Post-humanity, post-meaning, post-God. The world is gray, not just the sky, on everything. Trees, buildings, people's faces. The few humans left alive have mostly abandoned civilization because there's literally nothing left to sustain it. The father carries a weapon with limited options because in this new world, there are definitely things worse than death. They're heading south toward the coast, though neither really knows why. Maybe it'll be warmer. Maybe there'll be other good guys. The father keeps telling his son they're carrying the fire, that they're different from the road agents and desperate survivors. But what does good mean when you're competing for the last scraps of food? When you're teaching your 8-year-old that trust is a luxury they can't afford? The real horror isn't the cannibals or the cold or the endless gray. It's watching love try to survive in a world that's forgotten what love means. It's a father desperately trying to teach his son how to be human when humanity itself is dying. The road doesn't lead anywhere, it just keeps going, and walking it is all that's left to do. Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. Cannibalism becomes commerce when society rebrands human beings as livestock and calls it progress. Agustina Bazterrica wrote this dystopian horror after witnessing the industrial meat processing in her native Argentina, where she worked as a literary translator before becoming a novelist. The book's original Spanish title, Cadáver Exquisito, translates to exquisite corpse, revealing even more clearly the novel's focus on the commodification of human flesh. Bazterrica has stated that the novel serves as a mirror to our current treatment of animals, forcing readers to confront the violence hidden in their daily consumption. A virus has made all animal meat deadly to consume, and humanity has responded by breeding humans for slaughter. These special meat farms operate with industrial efficiency, treating human beings like cattle. The protagonist, Marcos, works in a processing plant where he oversees the slaughter of people who have been stripped of their legal personhood and reduced to products. The head are kept in cages, their vocal cords severed to prevent them from making sounds that might remind workers of their humanity. Marcos receives a pregnant female as a gift, and his interaction with her forces him to confront the moral bankruptcy of his world. She's been bred for consumption, but her pregnancy complicates everything. Will her child be raised as livestock, or could it somehow escape this fate? The novel's most disturbing element isn't the cannibalism itself, but how quickly society adapted to it, creating new social norms around human consumption. Bazterrica forces readers to examine the thin line between civilization and barbarity, suggesting that we're always just one crisis away from abandoning our humanity entirely. Crime and Punishment. Fyodor Dostoevsky, first published in 1866. Crime and Punishment is one of literature's earliest psychological thrillers. Fyodor Dostoevsky wasn't writing a whodunit. He tells you on page 1, Raskolnikov murders a pawnbroker with a stolen axe. What matters is why, and what happens next. A poor former student, Raskolnikov believes in a theory that certain people are extraordinary, above moral law. Kill one useless woman, save many lives. Simple, logical, justified, on paper. But the mind doesn't work like theory. Guilt seeps in immediately. Raskolnikov isolates himself. He sweats, he hallucinates, he rants about morality to strangers. The tension in this novel isn't from police pursuit, it's internal. He's hunted by his own conscience, and it doesn't let go. Dostoevsky, a man who narrowly escaped execution and survived a Siberian prison camp, knew torment firsthand. His writing drips with paranoia, religious tension, and existential pain. Redemption comes eventually, but not through justice. It arrives through suffering, love, and spiritual surrender. This book doesn't ask, was the murder right or wrong? It asks, how do we live with our choices? Raskolnikov's descent shows how intellectual arrogance collapses under emotional truth. Crime and Punishment is dense, heavy, and unrelenting. It's not horror in genre, but it's pure dread in psychology. Perfume. The story of a murderer. Patrick Suskind. The first thing he steals isn't a life, it's a smell. Rotting fish, hot tallow, stale river water. And somewhere inside that stench, a note so pure it rings like glass. Jean-Baptiste Grenouille is born without a scent of his own and with a nose that could map the world in the dark. He doesn't want love. He wants essence. Bottled soul. Paris is a reek. Tanneries, slaughterhouses, crowds packed like meat. Grenouille slips through it like a blade, cataloging odors no one else can perceive. Stone after rain, copper on a tongue, the sun burning a windowsill. Then he finds it. A girl's scent, bright as summer peaches and impossible innocence. He follows. He takes. He breathes her in as if it were prayer, then silence. Her fragrance haunts him, a ghost he must resurrect. He apprentices with perfumers, masters the alchemy of smell. Maceration, enfleurage, fat and flowers coaxed into liquid memory. Technique becomes theology. The world reduces to formulas, glass, and desire. To recreate the girl, he needs more notes. He needs them young. He needs them perfect. Bodies are only instruments. The perfume is the song. When the masterpiece is complete, it bends crowds to worship. Murder dissolves beneath rapture. They call it love because they cannot bear the word compulsion. Grenouille, the man with no scent, wears divinity like a borrowed coat and finds it empty. Perfume isn't about a killer. It's about hunger so pure it erases the person who feels it, and everyone who stands close enough to be turned into fragrant. The collector. He's quiet, ordinary, the kind of man who collects butterflies. Then he wins the lottery, buys a house, builds a room beneath it. White walls, locked door, no windows. That's where he keeps Miranda, the woman he's watched for months, the one he loves. He wants her to be comfortable, to like him, to understand him. He calls it love. It's not love, it's taxonomy. Fowles writes two prisons, one of brick, one of delusion. The captor narrates his justifications with chilling calm. The captive writes hers with growing despair. Two diaries circling each other like moths around a flame. He doesn't hurt her, at least not at first. That's what makes it monstrous. The violence hides in patience, in routine. He feeds her, listens, promises freedom that never comes. The tragedy is that he truly believes he's kind. By the time Miranda understands, kindness is another form of control. She can't escape because he doesn't think he's doing wrong. And that's the darkest part. Evil rarely knows its own reflection. The collector isn't about kidnapping. It's about ownership disguised as affection. The need to preserve beauty by killing its freedom. What's more terrifying? A monster who enjoys cruelty or one who calls it love? Invisible Monsters. Chuck Palahniuk. It begins with beauty and a bullet. In Invisible Monsters, 1999, a model at the peak of perfection loses half her face in an instant. A single gunshot erases her looks, her career, her identity. The tabloids call it tragedy. She calls it freedom. With her jaw gone and her voice reduced to whispers, she vanishes from the world that once worshipped her. But instead of mourning, she reinvents herself, alongside a seductive, gender-fluid con artist named Brandy Alexander. Together, they embark on a cross-country odyssey of self-erasure, shedding names, memories, and gender like dead skin. Each chapter folds in on itself, a mirror shattered and rearranged. Palahniuk writes horror through identity, turning vanity into violence and trauma into theater. Beneath the chaos is a single obsession: to control how the world sees you, even if it means destroying yourself to do it. The novel's real monster isn't disfigurement, it's obsession with perfection. The narrator's mutilation becomes rebellion against a culture that only loves surfaces. Every grotesque act, every mask, every lie is a scream for authenticity in a world that mistakes visibility for worth. By the end, beauty and horror are inseparable. The characters don't find redemption, they find performance. The story circles back to the gun, to the act that started it all, a woman pulling the trigger to silence the world's gaze. Invisible Monsters is fashion turned nightmare, self-love turned autopsy. It's the truth that every mask hides a wound, and sometimes the wound hides best when it smiles for the camera. 1984. Big Brother is watching you. Not just your actions, your thoughts, your dreams, your memories of what happened yesterday. George Orwell created the ultimate nightmare, A world where truth itself becomes whatever the government says it is, and thinking differently is literally a crime. Winston Smith works at the Ministry of Truth, where his job is rewriting history. If the party says a battle never happened, Winston erases every record. If today's enemy becomes tomorrow's ally, Winston changes every newspaper, every book, every document to match the new reality. The past becomes whatever Big Brother needs it to be, and anyone who remembers differently is guilty of thought crime. But Winston does remember. Chocolate tasting better, his mother's face, a time before the party controlled everything. These memories make him dangerous, a criminal just for thinking. When he falls in love with Julia, when he dares to believe in something beyond the party's reach, he discovers that even his rebellion was planned, monitored, allowed to happen. Room 101 isn't just punishment, it's personalized psychological destruction. Whatever you fear most, they'll use it. Not to eliminate you, but to break you completely. To make you betray everything you love until there's nothing left but obedience. The most terrifying line in the book isn't screamed, it's whispered by Winston after they've finished with him. I love Big Brother. And he genuinely means it. The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. Childhood ends when neighbors become monsters and adults become willing participants in unthinkable cruelty. Jack Ketchum based this novel on the real-life torture and murder of Sylvia Likens in 1965, one of the most horrific child abuse cases in American history. The author spent years researching the case, driven by his need to understand how ordinary people could become capable of such systematic cruelty. Ketchum changed the victim's name to Meg Laughlin and relocated the story to suburban New Jersey, but the core horror remains intact, a community's willing participation in the destruction of innocence. 12-year-old Meg and her younger sister are left in the care of Ruth Chandler, a woman whose own children join in tormenting the girls. What begins as cruel teasing escalates into systematic abuse that involves neighborhood children and adults who either participate or remain silent. Ruth convinces the local children that Meg is evil, deserving of punishment, and gradually normalizes increasingly violent acts. The basement becomes a torture chamber where a child's screams go unheard by a community that has chosen not to listen. The story unfolds through the eyes of David, a teenage boy who witnesses the abuse but struggles with his own powerlessness to stop it. His perspective makes the horror even more devastating. We see how easily children can be manipulated into cruelty, how authority figures can abuse their power, and how silence becomes complicity. Ketchum's novel suggests that evil isn't born from monsters. It emerges from ordinary people who choose to abandon their humanity when faced with moral tests. Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. Published in 1899 as a novella, Heart of Darkness is a brutal critique of colonialism, disguised as an expedition story. Joseph Conrad, who sailed the Congo himself, wasn't writing about adventure. He was exposing the rot beneath civilized empires. Marlowe, the narrator, travels up the Congo River to find Mr. Kurtz, an ivory trader who's gone rogue. But this isn't really about Kurtz. It's about what happens when you strip away law, culture, and restraint. As Marlowe journeys deeper into the jungle, he witnesses horrors, enslaved laborers, unchecked violence, and eerie silence from the European colonists. By the time he finds Kurtz, the man has gone mad, worshipped as a demigod by locals, severed heads mounted outside his hut. Kurtz's last words, the horror, sum up everything Conrad wants you to confront. This isn't just about imperial cruelty. It's about how quickly power corrupts. Kurtz was once idealistic. Now he's consumed. And Marlowe? He doesn't leave enlightened. He leaves haunted. Heart of Darkness is dense, symbolic, and layered with ambiguity. The jungle becomes a metaphor for the mind, and what we find when we journey into it. Conrad's message is simple but chilling. The real monster isn't out there. It's inside us, and it always was. The Painted Bird, Jerzy Kosinski. The boy has no name, just mud on his face, hunger in his stomach, and silence where his family should be. World War II is the backdrop, but this isn't history, it's nightmare. Villages blur into one another, each one darker than the last. Wherever he goes, the cruelty follows. He wanders through forests and fields, hoping for kindness. What he finds is punishment. Peasants spit on him, calling him a demon. Priests whip him for sins he never confessed. Strangers beat him, starve him, sell him. One man gouges out another's eyes with a spoon. Another forces him to watch as birds, painted bright with dyes, are released into the sky, only to be torn apart by their own flocks. The boy learns that standing out means death. Each chapter is a new descent. He sees children buried alive, animals tortured for sport, women brutalized until they're shadows. He sees people betray each other for bread crusts for a moment of safety. His innocence rots, replaced by a numb shell that looks like survival. The Painted Bird isn't about war strategy or armies. It's about what war does to people left behind, the ones too small to fight but too alive to escape. The horror here isn't just in the violence, it's in how quickly cruelty becomes routine. By the end, the boy doesn't cry, doesn't speak, doesn't hope. He just watches, silent as the painted birds falling from the sky. Haunted. They come for art. Writers, poets, dreamers. A secret retreat in a crumbling theater. No phones, no exits, just time to make something great. At first, it feels like community. Then the food runs out. Then the lights fail. Then the stories start eating their authors. Each person crafts tragedy to seem more authentic, and soon authenticity means pain. They injure themselves for sympathy. They kill for inspiration. They stage their own suffering to make their art matter. Palahniuk turns creative ambition into a survival game where empathy is bait. The novel drips with disgust, rotting bodies, paranoia, and the slow death of sincerity. It's satire that feels prophetic. A world where content demands suffering, where trauma becomes performance. By the end, no one remembers why they came. They just want their story to outlive them. Fame as immortality, horror as proof they existed. It's not about ghosts, it's about artists haunting themselves. How much of your humanity would you destroy to make people listen? Trainspotting, Irvine Welsh. It begins with a rush, not of hope, but of heroin. In Trainspotting, 1993, Irvine Welsh writes from the gutter upward, using jagged Scottish dialect to capture a generation rotting in real time. The story follows Renton, Spud, Sick Boy, and Begbie, friends bound by addiction, poverty, and the illusion that they're choosing freedom. Their rebellion isn't against society, it's against sobriety, responsibility, and anything that might demand feeling. Every chapter pulses with chemical rhythm, manic euphoria, then decay. Renton narrates with wit sharp enough to cut, but it can't disguise the truth. He's killing himself in slow motion and calling it philosophy. The high is salvation, the needle is priest, and detox is hell. Welsh doesn't glamorize addiction, he anatomizes it, exposing how despair becomes ritual and how friendship collapses under the weight of survival. The true horror of Trainspotting isn't overdose or violence. It's the void that follows the high, the crushing fluorescent boredom of being alive. In that emptiness, the characters discover that rock bottom has no floor. Renton's eventual escape doesn't feel triumphant. It feels treacherous, a betrayal of the only world that ever made sense. Welsh writes addiction like cosmic horror, a force that consumes identity and replaces it with craving. The monsters here don't hide in shadows. They nod off in daylight. Trainspotting is a requiem for wasted youth, a hymn to apathy, and a reminder that hell doesn't need fire. It just needs a fix. The Wasp Factory. Frank Caldham is 16, lives on a remote Scottish island, and has committed terrible acts 3 times, all against family members. And that's just the beginning of the secrets buried in Ian Banks' most disturbing novel. The Wasp Factory itself is Frank's creation, a giant clock face with 12 compartments, each containing a different method of destruction. When Frank needs guidance, he releases a wasp inside and lets fate decide which chamber it enters. The wasp's demise determines Frank's actions, turning life and death decisions into a twisted game of chance. It's Frank's oracle, his god, his excuse. But Frank isn't quite who he seems. The medication his father provides isn't what he claims. The story about Frank's childhood injury isn't true. Frank's entire identity, including his gender, has been carefully constructed through years of manipulation and lies. His father has been conducting a decades-long psychological experiment on his own child, and Frank is both the subject and the victim. Banks doesn't just give us a teenage perpetrator, he gives us someone who is systematically destroyed and rebuilt as a weapon. Every terrible act Frank commits traces back to his father's manipulation. Every twisted ritual stems from years of calculated abuse. The real question isn't whether Frank is a monster, it's whether monsters are born or made, and what happens when the person creating them is supposed to love you most. Light of the Fireflies by Paul Penn. Isolation becomes a prison when a family's love turns into a suffocating trap that destroys everything it touches. Paul Penn wrote this psychological horror after becoming fascinated by cases of families who disappeared from society entirely, creating their own twisted versions of normal life. The novel's unnamed narrator has never seen sunlight, believing that the world above their underground bunker has been destroyed. Penn's background in screenwriting shows in his careful pacing and visual storytelling. Every detail of the family's cramped living space becomes a character in the story, from the mysterious locked room to the fireflies that provide their only light. A family of 6 has lived underground for years, convinced that the surface world is uninhabitable. The youngest child, born in the bunker, has never experienced anything beyond these concrete walls. His older sister has no eyes, the result of an accident that the family refuses to discuss in detail. The parents maintain strict control over their children's reality, creating elaborate lies about the outside world and their reasons for staying hidden. As the narrator grows older, he begins to question the family's story, especially when he discovers inconsistencies in their explanations. The truth, when it finally emerges, reveals that their isolation isn't protection, it's imprisonment. The parents have created this underground world to hide from consequences of their actions, and their children have become prisoners of their parents' guilt and fear. Penn explores how love can become toxic when it's built on lies, and how families can become the most dangerous prisons of all. Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk. Published in 1996, Fight Club is a sharp, nihilistic takedown of consumer culture and identity loss in modern life. The narrator, unnamed, sleepless, and emotionally numb, lives a life defined by IKEA furniture and corporate slogans. His body is exhausted, his mind is fractured, and his soul is missing. Enter Tyler Durden, charismatic, rebellious, everything the narrator isn't. Together they create Fight Club, a place for men to feel something real by beating each other senseless. But Tyler isn't real. He's a dissociative personality, a manifestation of suppressed rage. As the violence escalates into Project Mayhem, a full-blown anti-capitalist terror cell, the line between rebellion and madness disappears. Palahniuk uses jagged prose, dark humor, and raw aggression to strip away the illusions of modern manhood. The novel isn't glorifying chaos, it's diagnosing a spiritual sickness. Tyler preaches liberation but delivers destruction. The narrator realizes too late that Tyler is just another cage, built from broken identity. Killing him isn't just survival, it's recovery. Fight Club critiques toxic masculinity, emotional repression, and consumerism without offering easy solutions. The twist that Tyler is him isn't just a plot device, it's the thesis. When society buries your real self, what rises up might not be human. It might be violent, angry, and out for blood. Beloved, Toni Morrison. The house is full of ghosts. Floors that groan, walls that weep. A baby's laughter turning sharp in the dark. Seth knows the sound. It's the daughter she killed. She did it with her own hands. A desperate act to keep the child from the chains of slavery. The past is buried, but it doesn't stay buried. It walks. After the Civil War, Seth builds a fragile life with her surviving children. But memory is louder than freedom. The scars on her back, the chokecherry tree, speak of the whips that once claimed her flesh. Then a young woman appears, barefoot, dripping, whispering the name only Seth knows. Beloved. She's not just a stranger. She's the child returned, grown into something beautiful, something monstrous, something hungry. Beloved devours the household. She drains Seth's strength, isolates her from the world, binds her in chains of guilt heavier than iron. Denver, Seth's daughter, watches her mother shrink under the weight of a love that has rotted into obsession. Beloved demands stories, demands attention, demands flesh. The horror of Beloved isn't in jump scares. It's in the truth. Slavery doesn't end when the chains are broken. It lingers in memory, in family, in the ghosts that sit at the table and refuse to leave. Morrison doesn't write a ghost story. She writes a wound that breathes, a grief that eats. In the end, Beloved isn't just one girl. She's every shadow slavery left behind, whispering that the past never lets go. It waits. Less than zero. Los Angeles looks alive from far away. Neon, palm trees, the ocean humming behind glass. But inside the apartments, everything's dying in slow motion. Clay comes home from college and finds his friends unchanged. Still rich, still beautiful, still empty. They drive without destinations. They talk about nothing. They spend nights pretending to live. Parties blur into each other until even pleasure sounds tired. Ellis writes the 80s as a fever dream of apathy. Everyone moves fast, but nothing moves forward. Beneath the cocaine and music lies something hollow, a pulse without rhythm. Conversations drift like smoke, light, meaningless, gone before they matter. The city becomes a mirror reflecting everything they refuse to feel. No one screams here, no one bleeds. The horror isn't violence, it's vacancy. When Clay watches his friends cross lines that used to mean something, he doesn't stop them. He doesn't even flinch, because numbness is safer than grief, and indifference feels like control. The story never explodes, it just evaporates. By the end, there's no catharsis, only distance. They drive away from the wreckage without looking back, because in this world, there's nothing left to look for. Ellis doesn't condemn them, he just holds the mirror still. And in that reflection, you see what happens when comfort replaces conscience, and desire outlives purpose. The world didn't end, it just got bored. Hex, Thomas Oldhuvelt. It begins with a witch and a phone app. In Hex, 2016, the town of Black Spring lives under the watch of a dead woman. Catherine Van Weiler was executed centuries ago for witchcraft, her eyes and mouth sewn shut. She still walks the streets, appearing in living rooms, beside cribs, in supermarkets. No one can leave town without being pulled toward suicide. The only safety lies in surveillance. The townspeople have adapted. They built a system called Hex, a community app that tracks Catherine's location in real time. Teenagers live stream her. Parents joke about her presence. She's become a local legend and a shared prison. But when curiosity turns to cruelty, the balance breaks. Someone removes the stitches. The moment her eyes open, centuries of silence unravel into chaos. Huvelt's horror isn't about curses, it's about community complicity. The witch isn't the monster, the people are. Their obsession with control, secrecy, and image keeps the curse alive. The technology they use to contain evil only amplifies it, turning fear into spectacle. When Catherine's vengeance comes, it feels deserved. Not because she's innocent, but because the town has become her mirror. Every camera, every app notification, every whispered lie binds them tighter. Hex transforms folklore into digital dread. It asks what happens when a haunting becomes content, when a curse becomes routine. By the end, the town is still standing, but its soul is gone, uploaded, archived, and shared. The witch didn't destroy them. She just showed them what they already were. The Bell Jar, 19 years old, brilliant, beautiful, with the world at her feet. Esther Greenwood should be happy. Everyone tells her she should be happy, but happiness feels impossible when you're suffocating under a bell jar, breathing the same stale air while watching life happen through thick glass. Sylvia Plath's only novel reads like a slow-motion descent into darkness. Esther interns at a glamorous magazine in New York City, surrounded by opportunities most girls would dream of. But depression doesn't care about your circumstances. It creeps in quietly, stealing colors from the world until everything looks gray. Food tastes like nothing. Sleep becomes impossible. Even the simplest decisions feel overwhelming. The suffocation is gradual, then sudden. Esther loses interest in her work, then her friends, then herself. She attempts to end her pain multiple times, through various means, but each failure leaves her more trapped than before. Even in the psychiatric hospital surrounded by other broken people, the jar remains firmly in place. What makes the bell jar unbearable isn't the mental illness, it's the clarity. Esther's thoughts are logical, her observations sharp. She sees the world exactly as it is, without the merciful delusions that let most people function. The bell jar isn't insanity. It's the terrible burden of seeing life with perfect, crushing clarity. And once you're under it, the glass is impossibly thick, and no one outside can hear you screaming. The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. Knowledge becomes a curse when humanity discovers it occupies the bottom of a cosmic food chain that stretches into infinity. H.P. Lovecraft wrote this foundational horror story in 1926, but his vision of cosmic insignificance feels more relevant than ever in our age of expanding astronomical knowledge. Lovecraft suffered from night terrors throughout his life, and his fear of the unknown permeates every page of this tale. The story's structure, a manuscript within a manuscript within a manuscript, mirrors how forbidden knowledge spreads like a virus, contaminating everyone who encounters it. Lovecraft's creation of the fictional Necronomicon became so convincing that people still search for copies in libraries today. The narrator inherits his granduncle's research into a mysterious cult that worships something called Cthulhu, a cosmic entity that lies dreaming beneath the Pacific Ocean. As he delves deeper into the investigation, he uncovers evidence that this creature and its kind ruled Earth long before humanity existed, and they're merely sleeping until the stars align properly for their return. The cultists chant Funglui Muglawanaf Cthulhu, Ralye Wugahnagal, Ftagan. In his house at Ralye, dead Godala waits dreaming. What makes this story particularly disturbing isn't the monster itself, but the revelation that humanity's entire existence is irrelevant to the true powers of the universe. Cthulhu's awakening wouldn't bring about an apocalypse. It would simply mean the end of human relevance. We're insects who've briefly inherited a world that was never truly ours. Lovecraft suggests that the greatest horror isn't death or pain, but the knowledge that we're alone in an indifferent universe where our existence means nothing. The Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris. Published in 1988, The Silence of the Lambs isn't just a thriller, it's a psychological chess match. At the center is Clarice Starling, a young FBI trainee tasked with interviewing Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychiatrist and cannibalistic serial killer. Her goal? Use Lecter's insight to track down another killer, Buffalo Bill, who's abducting and skinning women. But Harris doesn't make this about the case. It's about control. Every conversation between Clarice and Lecter is a layered power exchange. Lecter doesn't just answer questions. He dissects Clarice's psyche. He sees her trauma, her ambition, her fear, and he respects her. That's what makes it disturbing. Buffalo Bill is terrifying, yes, but he's distant. Lecter, on the other hand, is present. Calm, cultured, uncaged in his mind, even behind glass. He's a villain who doesn't need to move a muscle to terrify you. Clarice isn't a traditional protagonist either. She's vulnerable, smart, determined, but constantly undermined in a male-dominated field. Her journey is as much about proving herself as it is about catching a killer. The Silence of the Lambs succeeds because it understands that horror isn't just gore or screams. It's intimacy with evil. Harris shows us how unsettling it is when your greatest ally might be the most dangerous person in the room. Crash. J.G. Ballard. The highway is a shrine of twisted metal. Headlights flicker like candles, and every skid mark feels like scripture. In Crash, car accidents aren't tragedies, they're rituals. For James Ballard's characters, the smell of gasoline and the crunch of glass are more intimate than love. The story begins with a collision, but it doesn't end there. The survivors don't recoil from the wreckage, they lean closer. Dr. Robert Vaughn, a scarred prophet of this new religion, dreams of dying in a crash with a celebrity, his body fused to steel and flesh in a final act of devotion. Around him gather disciples who no longer see machines as tools but as lovers, extensions of desire and destruction. Cars become bodies. Wounds become art. Sex is reenacted in crumpled vehicles, pleasure tangled with airbags and shattered windshields. The fetish isn't about death, it's about transformation, the merging of skin and chrome until neither can exist without the other. Ballard writes it clinically, almost cold, as if reporting on a medical experiment rather than human obsession. And that's what makes it worse. The violence isn't random, it's deliberate. The characters chase crashes the way others chase intimacy, convinced that only through destruction can they feel alive. The horror of Crash isn't supernatural, it's prophetic. Technology doesn't just reshape us, it seduces us. And when we finally surrender, the line between passion and wreckage disappears. Because in this world, love doesn't mean holding someone close. It means slamming into them at 80 miles an hour. The Virgin Suicides. The Lisbon house is a museum of silence. Curtains drawn, air thick with perfume and repression. 5 sisters live there, beautiful, remote, and doomed. The boys across the street watch them like astronomers watching dying stars. They whisper their names, collect their secrets, build shrines out of memory. The girls become myths, long before they die. Eugenides writes through distance, through voices remembering what they never understood. The parents, desperate to protect, build walls too high for sunlight. The girls' freedom rots behind politeness. One night, one death, then another. Each suicide folds into the next, a language the neighborhood learns too late. The tragedy isn't the deaths, it's the fascination. The boys grow older but never stop narrating. They don't mourn the girls, they curate them. Every detail becomes sacred, every heartbreak romanticized. Nostalgia turns grief into something pretty enough to live with. The book's horror hides in memory itself, the way recollection edits pain into poetry, the way distance transforms victims into aesthetic. When the boys revisit the house years later, it's empty. Dust, echoes, a hollow that still feels alive. They realize they never knew the sisters. They only knew their own longing. Eugenides isn't telling a ghost story. He's writing about how people make ghosts to survive. Sometimes the dead aren't haunting us. We're haunting them. The Drowning Girl, Caitlin R. Kiernan. It begins with a story told too many times to trust. In The Drowning Girl 2012, Caitlin R. Kiernan blurs the line between memory, myth, and madness through the voice of India Morgan Phelps. Imp, a schizophrenic painter who can't tell if she's haunted or hallucinating. She meets a woman named Eva Canning on a lonely road, naked and shivering, claiming to have escaped from the sea. Or maybe she met a ghost. Or maybe she invented her. Every retelling rewrites itself. Imp's illness turns narrative into labyrinth. She documents everything, journal entries, paintings, voice notes, but truth keeps dissolving in water. The ocean becomes a metaphor for her mind, deep, shifting, full of drowned things that sometimes rise again. Kiernan writes horror as confusion, a tidal pull between fantasy and delusion where monsters are metaphors and metaphors start to bite back. What makes The Drowning Girl terrifying isn't the ghost or the madness, but the erosion of certainty. The reader becomes as unreliable as the narrator, lost in the waves of her perception. Every page feels like drowning, beautiful, slow, inevitable. Imp's tragedy isn't that she's broken. It's that she understands her mind too well to trust it. Her voice is lyrical, aching and terrifyingly self-aware. A horror that doesn't scream, it drifts. By the end, Imp stands between sanity and surrender, whispering that truth doesn't set you free, it drags you under. The Drowning Girl is water in narrative form, reflective, distorted, and impossible to hold. We have always lived in the castle. Mariquette Blackwood lives in a big house with her sister Constance and Uncle Julian. They never leave. They never have visitors. And there's a very good reason nobody comes around anymore. 6 years ago, the rest of the Blackwood family died from poisoning at Sunday dinner. Shirley Jackson's final masterpiece is told through Mariquette's eyes, and she's completely, cheerfully unhinged. She buries silver dollars in the yard and nails books to trees to keep her family safe. She talks to her cat like he's her closest confidant. She dreams of living on the moon where no one can hurt them anymore. Her narration has the sing-song quality of a child's nursery rhyme, which makes everything infinitely more disturbing. Constance was tried for the deaths and acquitted, but the townspeople still believe she's guilty. Now the sisters live in complete isolation, surviving on Constance's preserves and Mariquette's protective rituals. When their cousin Charles arrives trying to claim the family fortune, Mariquette's fragile world begins to crumble. Jackson never tells us who really poisoned the family. She doesn't need to. The real horror isn't the deaths, it's what comes after. How guilt and trauma can rot a family from the inside out. How love can become indistinguishable from madness. How some people build prisons and call them home, then hand the keys to the person they love most, even if that person is completely out of their mind. The Shining. Winter falls like a curse over the Overlook Hotel. The snow seals every door, every road, every hope of leaving. Inside, Jack Torrance tries to be good. A father, a husband, a man reborn. He believes isolation will heal him. He believes work will save him. But the hotel has been waiting for someone just like him. King writes madness as a kind of inheritance. The ghosts here don't howl or crawl. They whisper, they pour drinks, they praise his potential, they remind him who he used to be before the world made him small. Jack listens, because madness always starts as flattery. The typewriter begins to hum, words repeat like spells, and the walls start to breathe with old, remembered sins. The horror isn't the hotel. It's how much Jack wants what it offers. Power, validation, release. The ghosts only finish what addiction already began. Wendy and Danny watch the man they love dissolve into something older and colder. Every echo of laughter in the hall sounds like his voice. By the time the snow buries the hotel, the difference between possession and relapse disappears. The monster isn't summoned, it's remembered. King's brilliance lies in the tragedy. The Overlook doesn't create evil, it harvests it. The real terror isn't supernatural, it's familiar. It's what waits inside every man who believes control is the same as love. Because sometimes the ghosts don't haunt you, they answer when you call. Geek Love by Katherine Dunn. Family becomes a circus when parents breed their children to be monsters and call it love. Katherine Dunn spent years researching carnival culture and the lives of people with physical differences, driven by her fascination with society's treatment of those it considers other. The novel's narrator, Olympia Banowski, is an albino hunchback dwarf who considers herself the least remarkable member of her family, a perspective that immediately alerts readers to the twisted nature of the Banowski clan. Dunn worked as a journalist covering boxing matches, and her unflinching approach to violence and physical transformation permeates every page of this family saga. The Banowski parents deliberately expose their pregnant mother to drugs, chemicals, and radiation to create children who will be profitable circus attractions. Their efforts produce Artie, a boy with flippers instead of limbs who becomes a charismatic cult leader, Ellie and Ify, Siamese twins who share a body but maintain separate personalities, and Chick, who appears normal but possesses telekinetic powers. The family travels the country in their carnival, with the children performing for audiences who pay to see their differences. As the children grow older, their relationships become increasingly twisted. Artie develops a religious following called Arterism, where devoted followers pay to have their limbs amputated to become more like their flippered messiah. The family's love is possessive and destructive. They protect each other fiercely while simultaneously exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. Dunn forces readers to confront their own assumptions about normalcy, beauty, and family loyalty. The Benowskis' love is genuine, but it's also toxic, creating a world where being different is both a blessing and a curse. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. Published in 1953, Fahrenheit 451 is Ray Bradbury's warning about a world that burns books to keep people docile. The title refers to the temperature at which paper ignites. In this future, firemen don't save homes, they destroy knowledge. But the real danger isn't censorship by force, it's apathy. People have traded depth for convenience, critical thinking for passive entertainment. The TV walls are loud, the conversations are shallow, nobody remembers anything meaningful. Montag, a fireman, begins as part of the system. But a brief encounter with Clarice, a curious young girl who asks questions instead of reciting slogans, sparks a quiet rebellion. He steals a book, then another. Then everything changes. His wife numbs herself with media. His boss lectures him about the danger of ideas. And Montag starts to see. The true horror isn't the flames, it's the emptiness. People aren't forced to stay ignorant. They've chosen it. Bradbury, writing during the rise of television and Cold War paranoia, foresaw a society addicted to distraction. The firemen are symptoms, not the cause. Montag's escape leads him to a hidden group of readers who memorize books to preserve them. It's a fragile hope, but it burns brighter than any fire. In this world, remembering becomes an act of rebellion. The Trial, Franz Kafka. It starts with a knock. No warning, no crime, no explanation. Two men step into Joseph K's room and tell him he's under arrest. For what? They don't say, they don't need to. From that moment on, guilt is his shadow, stitched to him by a system that never shows its face. Joseph K. is a banker, a man who believes in rules, contracts, order. But when he enters the world of the court, logic dissolves. Hearings take place in cramped attics. Officials speak in riddles, shrugging when he demands clarity. Files vanish. Addresses shift. People whisper his name, but never the charges. Every door leads deeper into a maze with no center, no exit. He hires lawyers, fires them, pleads his case, loses his voice in the noise. Each new authority figure, clerks, assistants, priests, offers metaphors instead of answers. The longer he fights, the more absurd it all becomes, until Joseph himself begins to believe he must be guilty. Why else would the system grind him down so completely? The trial isn't about crime, it's about power. It shows how authority doesn't need to be just to be absolute. The true horror isn't Joseph's execution. It's the erosion of his certainty, the slow surrender of his mind to a machine that doesn't care whether he's innocent. In the end, Joseph kneels in a quarry, a knife sliding into his chest. Not for what he did, but because the system said so. The Collector of Secrets, Gone Girl, Richard Aoyama. It begins with disappearance and the lie that fills the void. In Gone Girl 2012, Amy Dunn vanishes on her 5th wedding anniversary, leaving behind a trail of blood and a husband, Nick, who swears he's innocent. The media swarms, the public judges, and behind every headline lies manipulation. Hers, his, and ours. Flynn builds horror from perception itself, how stories mutate until truth becomes performance. Amy isn't a victim. She's an architect, constructing her own myth with diary entries and deception, turning the world into her jury. Every revelation strips away romance until what's left isn't marriage, but mutual warfare disguised as love. Flynn's genius is that she doesn't write villains. She writes reflections. Amy's rage, Nick's weakness, the media's hunger, all part of the same machine that feeds on narrative. In The Collector of Secrets, by Richard Aoyama, the same theme echoes through espionage and trauma. Truth as poison, secrets as currency. A translator uncovers government atrocities buried in official history and learns that knowledge, like love, destroys the one who carries it. Both novels orbit the same darkness, information as violence. love letters, diaries, classified files, all weapons in disguise. Amy's final victory isn't survival, it's authorship. She writes the story everyone believes. The truth becomes hers to keep, and the rest of us can only read it. Gone Girl ends not with justice, but equilibrium. Two liars locked in devotion, proving that sometimes the only way to survive love is to weaponize it. A Little Life. It begins with promise. Four friends in New York chasing brilliance and meaning. They build careers, share apartments, fall in and out of love. For a while, it feels like triumph. But one of them, Jude, carries a past that never loosens its grip. Scars too deep for memory, pain too constant to confess. Yanagihara doesn't flinch. She writes suffering without spectacle, grief without distance. Jude's trauma seeps through every page, quiet, methodical, endless. His friends love him fiercely, but love cannot negotiate with ghosts. Every kindness feels like intrusion. Every embrace ends with apology. He wants to be saved, yet believes salvation is for other people. The novel unfolds like slow anesthesia wearing off. Moments of beauty ache under the weight of what they can't erase. Success doesn't heal him. Friendship doesn't redeem him. The past isn't a wound, it's geography. You can leave the place, but it never leaves you. By the end, love becomes endurance. Life becomes punishment disguised as survival. Yanagihara builds a cathedral of pain and dares you to stay inside. You do, because the horror isn't the trauma, it's the tenderness that can't fix it. There are no monsters here, only people trying not to break. And sometimes, that's the darkest story of all. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Stieg Larsson. It begins with a mystery, an old man haunted by a photograph and a girl who disappeared 40 years ago. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, 2005, journalist Mikael Blomqvist and hacker Lisbeth Salander join forces to investigate the vanishing of Harriet Vanger, heiress to one of Sweden's most powerful families. But beneath the surface of wealth and order lies rot, a family history of abuse, fascism, and ritualized violence. Lisbeth is the novel's burning heart. A ward of the state, brilliant but brutalized, she carries the scars of every institution that claimed to protect her. She doesn't seek justice, she enacts it. Her trauma is weaponized precision, hacking systems and predators alike. As the mystery deepens, the investigation becomes less about Harriet and more about the machinery of male violence, how it hides behind respectability, how it feeds on silence. Larsson fuses noir and horror through realism so cold it feels surgical. The crimes aren't supernatural, they're systematic. Each revelation exposes not monsters, but men, and the structures that keep them untouched. When Lisbeth strikes back, it isn't revenge, it's equilibrium. She becomes an angel of entropy in a world that worships order, a survivor who refuses to forgive. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo isn't just a thriller, it's a scream encoded in data, a gothic of corruption disguised as procedural logic. Its horror lies in what doesn't die, the power that enables cruelty, and the brilliance it takes to burn it down. We need to talk about Kevin. It begins after the massacre, a mother writing letters to the husband who left her. Each page becomes a courtroom, each sentence an exhibit. Her son Kevin murdered his classmates. The question isn't why, it's how long she saw it coming. Shriver doesn't write a thriller. She writes confession disguised as denial. Every memory turns into evidence against her. Every affection sounds rehearsed. The mother studies her own life like a crime scene, desperate to know if evil can be inherited or if she simply raised it too well. The story is calm, methodical, surgical. No hysteria, no excuses. Just a woman dissecting motherhood with the precision of guilt. Kevin isn't a monster from nowhere. He's a reflection too sharp to look at directly. The more she rewinds, the more it feels like fate was watching from the nursery door. There's a moment near the end, one brief, unbearable silence, where Kevin finally speaks with something that sounds like regret. But by then, remorse is meaningless. The damage is historical. The mother forgives him anyway, because that's what mothers do. Shriver leaves no mercy, only echoes. The horror isn't the act, it's the aftermath, the way the world expects her to stop loving him, and the way she can't. Because the hardest question isn't what created Kevin, it's why she still needs to talk about him. The Lovely Bones, Alice Sebold. It begins with a voice from heaven, calm, young, already dead. In The Lovely Bones, 2002, 14-year-old Susie Salmon narrates her own murder and everything that follows. She watches from a liminal afterlife as her family unravels and her killer carries on unnoticed. What should have been a crime story becomes something stranger, a meditation on grief, guilt, and the slow corrosion of ordinary lives touched by violence. Sebold tells it in fragments. Susie's yearning for her first kiss, her parents' marriage collapsing, her sister's quiet rebellion. Heaven isn't clouds and harps. It's a waiting room built from memory, a place shaped by longing. Susie can see everything, but change nothing. That's the book's cruelest trick, omniscience without agency. Her death freezes time for everyone left behind. The novel's horror doesn't come from blood or ghosts, but from persistence, how trauma lingers, how absence becomes a presence. The murderer remains banal, faceless, just another neighbor mowing the lawn. The world doesn't stop. It simply learns to live around the wound. When Susie finally lets go, it isn't redemption. It's acceptance that closure doesn't mean justice. Her heaven is small, imperfect, human, made of all the things she never got to finish. The Lovely Bones turns tragedy into quiet dread, showing that the scariest part of death isn't being gone. It's watching life go on without you.
Subscribe for more interesting stuff. Tell us your experience in the comments.